Welcome to tomorrow's Tech Today. This podcast episode is sponsored by Intel. And to find out more about Intel, please click on the link in the description to learn more. So join us now for a deep dive on how to infuse AI everywhere today, but also what to look forward to tomorrow too. And to do exactly this, I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Goff, who is Worldwide General Manager for Intel Health and Life Sciences. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. So I always love to kind of start our show really finding out a bit more about the person behind the technology. So could you explain a bit more about your role at Intel, Chris, and how you got there? Maybe a moment that matters along the way. I'm sure that will inspire a lot of our listeners.
Sure. My training is in software. I was a computer science major in college, joined Intel, and about 10 years into my career, I joined a new organization within Intel called the Digital Health Group. And the objective of that organization was to build home healthcare products to enable people to improve their health at home, live longer independently, and so forth. And I was a product architect and a security architect of that team. And that really sort of sparked my passion for healthcare. There's not a ton of healthcare jobs within a big tech company like Intel. That business ended up spinning off in about 2009 into a joint venture with between Intel and GE Healthcare. And I decided to remain at Intel and support our sales force that works with what we call end users in healthcare. So this would be hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, governments, academia, really anyone who might use our technology for health and life sciences. And really, I see the role of me and my team as the bridge between a big tech company like Intel that develops innovative technology and the industry. So how can that tech innovation be applied to address some of the key business challenges in health and life sciences? When I joined, my role was technical, but now I lead the team, and it's great to on behalf of Intel, have some impact to improve healthcare around the world.
Oh, that's fantastic. And what a fantastic background, given what's happened over the last 2 years or so as well. That early endeavor into remote health, for example, I think so important. I love that metaphor of the bridge in many aspects, metaphorically, but also physically as well, bridging different sectors together, whether it's healthcare and tech, but equally academia and research, as you mentioned now. I think that's so vital. So fantastic. Thank you for setting the scene for your role there. Maybe we can drill in first to look at how Intel is delivering on some of the things that we've seen in recent times. So, as an example, I've just come off of a workshop this afternoon, actually. And as part of that, it was bringing C-suite together with practitioners. We were looking at some of the issues that organizations are facing today, in health sciences, but also in other sectors too. And some of the things that kept coming up with things like complexity, increasing accessibility, but also return on data effectively, and moving away from just having lots and lots of data, the volume issue, but some of the other paradoxes we see with not having the right things in place to actually return on that to get data value. So how are you working on getting from the volume to the value?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, our technology is pretty pervasive. I mean, we're in everything from the devices where the data is created in healthcare. That could be a CT scanner or an X-ray machine, through to the devices or the IT devices, the workstations, the laptops, to the edge systems, the data center, and the cloud. And it's everything from analysis of the data, processing of the data, to storage, to movement of the data over the network. Really our tech is across that continuum. We have a lot of computation devices, be they CPUs or accelerators, that are focused on AI and analysis. So we call them XPUs. So it could be a CPU, it could be a GPU, it could be some other kind of custom accelerators. And it's really about what's the right computing device for the right use case and task. So it's pretty broad breadth, everything from supporting battery powered devices at the edge through to high performance systems and computation of the data center. One area that people aren't as familiar with is our large investment in software, and I think this gets to some of the accessibility. So we don't want developers to have to understand, or certainly end users of our technology to have to understand the tech, right? So through our software investments, such as the One API toolkit, OpenVINO toolkit for computer vision. That's really how we abstract the details of the underlying technology or differences between the different options and unlock that innovation for first developers and then ultimately end users to sort of deploy that value in an easier way to across their business or across their ecosystem.
Absolutely. I wrote about that recently, actually. I kind of phrased it in kind of unleashing the capacity to create and to co-create. I think it's such an important point. Democratization, that accessibility is so huge. And, what you described there with that ecosystem across software and hardware and that pervasiveness and connectedness, I think is absolutely vital to scale innovation in all these areas that matter so much. So I love that. And I'd like to drill into, you kind of led me into this really nicely, actually, around AI and what the top 3 benefits you're seeing with some of that technology that's converging together. And you mentioned it almost naturally there, but also specifically, I'm thinking things like DL Boost, the new announcements we had around Xeon, but also SGX as well. Now, how is this specifically benefiting what we're seeing in the life and health sciences at the moment?
Yeah, maybe I'll hit on one quick example for each. So DL Boost stands for Deep Learning Boost. Deep learning is a machine learning technique that is experiencing a lot of growth today. In healthcare, the top areas where deep learning is used are medical imaging analysis. So maybe finding, doing image segmentation to find where the tumor is in this brain scan, for example, and natural language processing. So being able to understand what someone is saying, for like sort of a dictation use case, or scanning through like freeform text in an electronic health record to try and make sense of that unstructured text data that's there. Both of those are key use cases that benefit from deep learning, and we have integrated key instructions that are used to do that processing directly into our general purpose Xeon processor. So if someone is running on Xeon and they're doing a deep learning use case like image analytics or natural language processing, they'll get that acceleration, which will improve the performance, but also oftentimes also reduce the cost of that solution because of that higher performance. Shifting to Optane, Optane, this is a new, relatively new, Intel introduced it several years back, new kind of memory technology that has effectively created a new tier of memory in the storage system. So you have your main memory or DRAM, which is the highest performance, but it's also very costly, all the way down through to flash and hard disks and cold storage and so forth. So Optane in healthcare really enables a lot of what I think of as big memory solutions. So you need to put the data into memory in order to analyze it or perform AI. So being able to grow that the size of the data you can fit in there is important. Doing that with DRAM alone is not cost effective. So combining the traditional DRAM with an Optane persistent memory tier can drastically increase the size or the amount of data that can fit into memory at once. One quick example on that one is we worked with a organization called TGen, or the Translational Genomics Research Institute, here in the U.S. on a single cell sequencing use case where you're actually looking at the DNA of individual cells. And they took, using Optane, because they could fit more data in memory, they got their workload that was running, took 2 months to run, down to 13 days. So these are long running use cases that require a lot of data. And then lastly, you mentioned SGX. That stands for Software Guard Extensions. So this technology has actually been around at Intel for quite some time, but we only recently, last year, introduced it into our mainstream lineup for server processors. And what it does is it lets you essentially have what we call a secure enclave, but it's a protected area of memory that's enforced through the hardware, down through the system, into the CPU, where only an approved data set and approved application can run in that partition. So where I see this really taking off in health and life sciences are what we call multi-party analytics use cases. So oftentimes one organization doesn't have all the data they need to deploy or satisfy a use case. It might be you need data set from hospital A and a different data set from hospital B that has a different population of patients, maybe a different racial background or diverse background. You want to make sure that your algorithm can satisfy the needs of both populations. But it's very complex and costly to bring that data together from multiple organizations into one place. So using SGX, using confidential computing, you can ensure the patient privacy is protected when you're validating algorithms or training algorithms, and equally importantly, ensuring that the intellectual property of the algorithm is protected. So the companies that are developing these AI algorithms, the entire net worth of the company could be tied up in this one algorithm, and they really want to make sure that that doesn't sort of leak out and get grabbed by someone else. So that's really where the SGX is having big impact in healthcare today.
I love that. You literally popped a vision in my head as you were speaking there. And I was kind of thinking you were going from the laboratory to the collaboratory. That was literally ringing through my ears as you were describing that. But it really is, isn't it? And I can also see other benefits of that as well. So I have a background partly in healthcare myself. And I was a founder in blockchain AI space. And a part of that work was looking at clinical trials and how you can do better kind of safe, secure data sharing to encourage more people to share DNA data, for example. And one of the key issues there was for diseases and conditions where there's less data to work with. So maybe it's not something that, for example, heart disease or cancer, something a bit more, smaller populations, but also diversity of populations as well, encouraging people to say, actually, I want to contribute to that trial because I believe it's safe and secure to do so. That can have a real benefit on encouraging people to submit to trials as well and think, actually, it's only going to be used for the purpose I want it to be put to.
Yeah. And actually, blockchain is another application area where SGX is being applied in healthcare. For example, we've worked with Leidos on a contact tracing infrastructure. So you can imagine the data around vaccinations and health background and just the movement of a condition like COVID is sensitive, but it's very important to share that data across geographic boundaries, states here in the U.S., states, or nationally, provinces or countries, other parts of the world. But that application of blockchain secured by SGX, I think, is another great application area that we expect to take off going forward.
Fantastic. I love that. That's brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. That's great. And we've kind of already naturally gone into this a little bit, but perhaps we can drill in a bit further around kind of this rise of personalized and precision medicine. As you've been talking so far, I'm kind of seeing Intel's, really supporting three pillars around this real-time active intelligence, the secure way of doing that as well, but also this connectivity and this personalization. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about some examples of this work that you're doing in the precision medicine space, kind of drawing on the examples you've given so far.
Sure. One of the things I like about precision, when we think about precision medicine, the first thing that pops into my mind is genomics. So taking the human genome or the information about a person's DNA, analyzing it, and then figuring out based on what you find, what is the ideal, perhaps informing diagnosis, or what's the ideal treatment pathway for that patient, taking that into consideration. So I like it because it's a great edge to cloud or end to end example of where our technology is being applied. So if you think of something like genomics, you have a sequencer, which will take a tissue sample and convert that from a patient and convert that into digital form. Intel technologies inside that sequencer, that's called primary analysis or in the industry. Then once you have a digital representation, you want to compare it to a reference, comparing to find the differences or the variance. That's really a high performance computing problem, and that's called secondary analysis in the industry. But that's really where the majority of Intel's focus has been over the years, is drastically reducing the amount of time it takes to compare that genome to a reference genome to find the differences. And then a field that is growing is tertiary analytics. So once you have those differences, making sense of them. And there's a variety of different applications or efforts underway to, for example, do natural language processing on the literature to find, here's this variant in the genome. What does that mean? Because that knowledge base changes and grows over time. So what you knew 6 months ago, might be different from what you know today because the research has uncovered more. AI is being used across the continuum. Even at the secondary analysis stage. So, just for example, Google developed something called deep variant that uses deep learning, right? That we talked about earlier, deep learning to perform that analysis. And we have worked with that software in our teams to optimize that to take advantage of Intel technology and make it as high performance as possible.
Brilliant.
And using DL Boost, right? Using DL Boost.
Absolutely. Oh, that's brilliant. And you also reminded me of things like, again, with the industry coming together, things like the HPC consortium as well. Great example of using all this technology, reacting to that new information you're getting really quickly and accelerating that innovation curve and everyone coming together, for a common aim as well. So amazing work like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. And another case study as well, forgive me, but I wanted to mention this because I saw you post about this and I thought this was amazing because I also do quite a lot in education and work with kids that are coming through and do a lot, kind of democratizing access to opportunities. But I also noticed something around a partnership between ADHD America and looking at, telehealth and some opportunities that Intel is supporting there. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that because I think it's an amazing example, tech for good personified, as I would call it.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing it up. It's interesting. We like many large global companies did. We developed a pandemic program a couple of years ago in 2020 to figure out how could we apply our expertise, our technology to make some benefit, to have some benefit with the pandemic around the world. We called our Pandemic Response Technology Initiative. It was purely a humanitarian exercise, and I was closely involved with that program at the time. One side benefit was that we found that we improved and deepened the relationship with our partners and the end users of our technology, working with researchers and groups and organizations that we never had before, through that program. So we continued it, and it exists today, but now it is under our corporate social responsibility goals. That we call them RISE, which stands for Responsible, Inclusive, Sustainable, and Enabled by Intel Technology. So it's in this context that we were put in touch with ADHD America. They have a goal to use remote technology, use telehealth, use mobile technology, use sensing to understand in a real time perspective what the current status of someone with that condition has, especially as they're trying to navigate the complexities of school and learning. Is there real-time coaching and assistance we can give them to better manage some of those complexities? So we're working with that organization and using a lot of Intel technology in Amazon Web Services, for example, and other partners to really develop a platform to try and meet those needs and help the people that suffer from that important condition.
Absolutely, I love that. So forgive me, I had to kind of shine a light on that. It was amazing work. I think it's fantastic. It's fantastic. And another thing that also caught my eye, going back to more the precision medicine aspect, was the UAB study as well, and really looking at this use of AI to access new data and unlock new value from that as well. I wonder if you could share a little bit more about that example too.
Yeah, this is a growing area. I think the one area we saw expand quite dramatically during the pandemic was virtual care. In some cases that's telehealth. Basically just turning the face-to-face doctor-patient visit from a in-person encounter to a digital encounter over video conference. But it also applies very significantly inside the hospital, the inpatient environment. So you want to minimize the personal contact between the clinicians and potentially infected patients. And that patient safety is one challenge. Other challenges are just how can you monitor a wider group of patients effectively with a smaller amount of human capital, like basically applying the scarce high touch resources where they're needed the most. So there's a concept of a virtual ICU where an ICU bed is monitored remotely You can, in some cases, even control some of the settings, but you can certainly see the telemetry, figure out, look at a dashboard of patients and figure out which are potentially in need of an intervention. Intel has a key partner in this area called Medical Informatics Corp, and they have a great product called SickBay. In fact, our venture capital arm has invested in this company, and we work very closely with them to weave our technology into the platforms that they're developing. But this SickBay platform is what was deployed at UAB. You could think of the bedside telemetry in an ICU. Oftentimes, that is analyzed in real time or near real time, but then discarded. Usually that data is not even stored or persisted long term. So this platform consolidates the data to make it easy to consume and use for the clinicians. It stores it so you can go back in time and see, look at all the telemetry in one view for this patient when something happened, and figure out and use that to inform future treatment. And it's also a platform for developing and deploying predictive analytics. So using that to figure out, this patient is at high risk for a crash or a heart attack or some kind of deterioration. So this high risk group is where we want to focus our rapid response teams or care teams to try and prevent those negative outcomes from happening. So it's kind of a part of a broader opportunity that I see for the application of AI and analytics in healthcare, which is really shifting the industry from being reactive, the alarm goes off and we intervene, to proactive and predictive. Here's a high risk group of patients. Let's try and prevent that alarm from going off in the first place. And I think this UAB example and the Medical Informatics Corp SickBay platform is a good step in the right direction.
I love that. I love that. It's kind of that move, as you were saying, kind of from reactive to proactive, active intelligence, and taking away like silos as well, and also reducing data waste and turning it to that opportunity, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'm also thinking, for training aids from that data as well, how that can be brought into play for developing talent in the medical field as well. So many kind of array of benefits there. That is absolutely superb. I love that. Brilliant. And kind of we look at this as kind of as an umbrella of transformation in many ways. I think this edge to cloud aspect really kind of covers the trajectory of where we're going here. I wondered if you could kind of shine a light on the application of AI in health and life sciences more broadly, but focused around this edge to cloud evolution.
Yeah, edge to cloud has become kind of an industry catchphrase, if you will. But I think where it applies to healthcare and AI in general is around where you are going to deploy AI and why. What I mean by that is there's some AI use cases that are a great fit for the cloud, and there's others that maybe are not a great fit. So if I give one specific example, maybe in the area of image analysis. Let's say a company wants to, or either a health system or maybe a large imaging company wants to develop an algorithm that will find, that will maybe do image segmentation on some kind of medical image to find a feature of interest, like a tumor or something like that. In order to do that, they would need a large number, thousands of labeled images that they would use to train that algorithm. They may not have all that data, so the cloud might be a great place to gather data from other entities, from research collaborators or so forth, to use all the awesome scalable technology to do the high performance computing to train that algorithm, and then after a lot of R&D and a lot of trial and error, you have an accurate algorithm that you want to deploy somewhere. Well, where you want to deploy that is probably at the point of care, where when those images are produced, to analyze it right then, and so you can have the earliest possible intersect between the creation of that data and having a positive impact on patient care. But there latency comes into play, right? You don't want to take a large imaging study, which could be many slices of an image, send that all up to some remote cloud environment, do the analysis, and then bring the answer back. You probably want that inference, that's this part of AI, running right there at the edge on-prem, it maybe even embedded within the device. So depending on the the latency requirements, the data size, what the specific use case is. There are very good reasons for deploying different aspects of AI, maybe training and inference or other algorithms, either at the point of care, on-prem, or in the cloud.
I love that. Those are great examples there. And it really just shows that importance of context and matching, that right technology choice to where you need it. And also just convergence more broadly and the impact of 5G as well around other aspects of latency as well. So brilliant examples. I love that. And maybe we can look ahead a little bit now. I always love to kind of look at where we're going next, particularly given the speed of change we've had over recent months and the last 2 years more broadly. So what's your vision about what's, particularly around AI, but where would you like to see us, in the next year's time? What's your vision of what's possible?
I maybe take a little bit of a different tack with this. I think if you look at large, well-known health and life sciences organizations around the world, all of them or almost all of them will be able to point to, here's a great example of how we're using AI. Here's a great application and how it's driving benefits. But it's not pervasive. It's very. I talked to one CIO who said we have islands of excellence. But what you really want is not a handful, 5, 10 use cases. You want 5 or 10,000 use cases, that are benefiting from AI. So where I'd like to see the market go, where Intel's trying to make it go, is to make that more impactful and more broadly scalable. One way to do that is through software and sort of baking that into the solutions, so it's sort of off the shelf and invisible for a clinician, for example. So that's where I'd like to see the market go. Keep the technology in the background, enable the benefits, empower the clinical staff, empower the end users to benefit from AI and make them more efficient.
I love that. I've got your image. You mentioned earlier about the bridge. So I've got the islands in front of me now, and these little bridges, they're linking them all together. So that's fantastic.
We need to connect the islands into a continent, right? And then
exactly. I love that. That's brilliant. Maybe as a final point then, in terms of kind of bringing that to life, empowering that, and you mentioned about software there as well. But what do you think we can do to better support that? It could be from a collaboration point of view. It could be around education and literacy. What's your thought about what we can do better to help bridge those islands?
Well, I'll harken back to the multi-party analytics example. So I think for decades, interoperability has been a big challenge in healthcare. Being able to exchange data, being able to communicate effectively across organizations, but really the interoperability aspect is only one part of that challenge. I think there's intellectual property concerns. Now everyone's drank the Kool-Aid that data is the new oil. Should I be getting compensated for making this data available to some other organization? So I think with these multi-party analytics use cases, again, part of the broader confidential computing focus, we have the ability to really operate on data where it resides. So no longer do you have to replicate a huge data set and put it in a different environment. You can encrypt an algorithm. You can bring the algorithm into your environment. You can run that algorithm in a SGX protected trusted execution environment and only send the derived results back. There's just so many benefits to that approach, from cost, complexity, time, the privacy of the data, the protection of the intellectual property, that I think that will unlock many benefits over time and help enable that more pervasive application of AI. So it's definitely a priority for us, and will be for going forward.
Brilliant, Chris. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more strongly. That's amazing. And I think we've got time for one final point. So just something maybe to finally share with the audience, maybe a key aspiration or something you're particularly excited about that you're leading in Intel, or just more broadly around the community, the ecosystem partnerships you have as well for 2022. What's something for everybody to look out for?
Well, I mentioned my involvement and many hundreds of people across Intel's involvement in our pandemic response technology initiative. Now, our RISE, or corporate social responsibility goals. If I look at how that was applied to healthcare, we saw a lot of deployment of AI, tons of deployment in telehealth. Much of that was came about from a emergency regulatory changes by governments around the world to make telehealth more possible. Lots of advancements and never before seen collaboration for developing therapeutics and vaccines across the world. My hope is one, that a year from now we'll be back to normal, or as close to normal as possible, whatever normal looks like, and two, that spirit of collaboration and tech innovation and frankly great solutions that have been put in place over the last year to try and address some of these challenges. We don't turn back the clock and go back to the way things used to be. In some ways, we've really advanced the use of telehealth by maybe a decade. I want to make sure that we build on that and don't, sort of go back to the way it was before. If that makes
Absolutely, no, I love that. I love that. It reminds me of the word contagion. It's one of those words that in recent times has had a negative connotation, but I think we should reclaim it. And everything you were saying there at the end, let's make this what we've learned over this period of time, and that spirit of collaboration you mentioned there. Let's make it an era for collaboration and a contagion of positive change. And your CEO, I saw an amazing little speech you did, and in it he was saying technology is magic. And again, I think that initiative and that vision for the future really encapsulate that aim. So thank you, Chris. Honestly, it's been an absolute joy speaking to you. And thank you for joining us today on Tomorrow's Tech Today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Tomorrow's Tech Today. If you enjoy what we're doing, please subscribe to us and leave a review. It really means a lot. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram and see more behind the scenes video footage on YouTube. Thanks for listening.